Hi, this is Jennifer Ortega, and we are here at Bordner's in Los Angeles at the 21st annual Shriekfest, which is one of Los Angeles's longest running horror film festivals. And I am here with the coolest of ghouls, Mr. Boots Electric himself. And I was wondering, since we are here celebrating horror films, if maybe I could ask you what some of your favorite horror movies are.
Well, I mean, I have a bunch, but I mean, starting from the modern, Mandy is my all-time favorite horror film. It's Alive from the '70s, which scared the shit out of me. The movie scared me to death. Um, the Bad Seed, of course.
I saw her at the Castro, the actual Bad Seed, like over 20 years ago. She was there.
How was she?
Amazing. I missed work for it.
I would too. And Silver Bullet. Silver Bullet's actually one of my all-time favorite horror films with Corey Haim and Gary Busey. Stephen King film. Canadian production, of course.
I like there is always to be a big crossover in genre, but like fan base as well when it comes to rock and roll and horror. They kind of intermesh in a way.
Well, I mean, bands like the Cramps started a whole thing called, horror rock, I guess you would say. Um, there's all kinds of bands that particularly embrace it because, yeah, they do go hand in hand. There's a spookiness to rock and roll. There's a darkness to rock and roll. There's a corrupting factor in rock and roll, and it's horrible. But horror doesn't have to not be fun.
You look even, I mean, one of your favorite shows is The Munsters, which it's monsters. It's of course not a spooky horror movie, but it is monsters, and it is definitely such a huge part of more of the comedy of the genre. But it's
Well, if you think about the Monsters does have a horror backdrop, a classic horror backdrop, but using that to point out the absurdities of the mundane and of the universality of people and what they go through. That even monsters are going to go through the regular humdrum of life. It's also a way to laugh at the macabre. The macabre is everywhere. If you know how to see it, there's darkness wherever there's light. So the monsters for me is that hilarious beauty of what horror is, the absurdity of life.
I have to ask because you do know and are friends with Rob Zombie, and he's making that film about the
Just
monster.
rebuilt 1313 Mockingbird Lane.
Do you think he's going to do a good job?
I don't think he can fail. But furthermore, he's trying. And the thing about cinema, the thing about art, is that it is in the eye of the beholder. And I think that what we might do better to have is a little bit of an attitude adjustment so that we're able to see the trial and error element of things. In the music business, an artist wasn't even expected to have a radio single for 2 or 3 records. They would develop that artist. You know, you kind of have to let that happen. This is the first foray into this particular subject. What Rob Zombie is doing is brave because there's a lot of doubt, there's a lot of unknowns. And so by attempting to handle this, he might make mistakes, but his mistakes are going to be joyous mistakes because they'll show us what to do next time. And I think he's got a handle on what it needs to be. I trust him. Um, I love Rob, and I'm glad for him. His version of Halloween is the highest selling in the whole damn franchise, and that speaks volumes to its likability.
When I first met you, I was really blown away by your knowledge of cinema and your appreciation for it. And one of my favorite things was I love Mandy as well. And you perhaps are the only other person that viewed it as a love story. And I love so much that they're able to look at a film differently because that was my review was about when I originally saw it. Yes. And you're the only other person that ever had said that to me. And I was so glad that you saw that element. And
I relate to that movie. That movie, in the strangest way, perfectly sums up what you could say would be my experience in Paris. Because to the backdrop of this horror at every turn, of this horror of gore, of blood and guts and awful smells and sounds and murder and chaos and death, there was beautiful love taking place. Perfect, beautiful love. Flawless. absolutely perfect. When someone gives their life for their friend, that's the greatest. And I saw that. And in Mandy, you have a person who was willing to give his life for his friend, and in the backdrop of all this horror and chaos, he's doing something perfect and pure. He's the only one doing God's work in an ocean of false prophets and of snake oil salesmen. That doesn't mean that God's wrong. It just means the messenger can be flawed.
Um, I love too that because you are such a fan of Rocky Horror, which is a horror opera, and
Well, again, it's the perfect demonstration of what it was you're talking about. How perfectly and seamlessly the two things can collide. I mean, how many horror films have an incredible soundtrack? You know what I mean? And the incredible soundtrack is critical to the action, to the cinema. The Rocky Horror Picture Show is a template I think that's perfect. I mean, in a lot of ways. That's why I intend to, I want to remake, I want to continue the tradition of what Rocky Horror Picture Show was getting at with a movie that is a musical and a horror film. Like a real horror film. Like Rocky Horror Picture Show did it tongue in cheek. This one is not going to be as much fun. It'll be a joy, but what I'm envisioning would be like Mandy meets Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
what I would love, I mean, there's definitely like a bunch of directors I can think of offhand because I would really love to hear you score.
Also, the director that did the new Pet Cemetery.
Kevin, our friend Kevin. I would love to see you score one of Kevin's movies, honestly, because I would love to see your take on scoring a horror movie. I think it would be so interesting.
I'm really interested in doing that. The musical themes that I would hear, I think, would be interesting too, because when someone might be hearing dark music, I may not be. Because sometimes the darkest soundtrack is the one that's the most fanciful. And then I think we understand this when we watch movies like what was the movie about where the clown and they do the little Tiny Tim song, Tiptoe Through the Tulips?
I'm trying to think, but I immediately thought of Deep Red, where it's a kid's melody playing the Dario Argento movie. But now,
But you know what I'm talking about,
Yeah,
where the
I know
kid
what movie.
sees him and the dude's coming to get him
yeah,
from the other side, and his dad has to go get him.
yes, I know what. I think. Yeah, I know what you're talking
Well,
about.
Tiptoe Through the Tulips, perfect example. That's a delightful song. That's really macabre. Or any David Lynch film where you have some, like even we can talk about the director of Goodfellas and Martin Scorsese. Martin Scorsese will use delightful romantic '60s doo-wop songs with the action being played out is the most gruesome and violent fucking forms of murder and mayhem that you can imagine while this soundtrack is playing. That's the reality of music. Context is king. Context is king, and the context that a song is presented in will modify and fundamentally change the perception of it. I mean, how many people do we know in our lives that when a song is played, a certain song, whatever that song is, that we love, that everyone in the room gets happy for, there might be one or two people that'll be like, this song really bums me out, you know. A random song can be playing. It's Pavlov in a lot of ways too. Any song can be playing when something horrible is happening and you get conditioned. And that's the beauty of art. Art, what we do in motion picture business and music business is we take images and we edit them together. So in reality, they're abstract. They're an abstract, fluid, linear path of images. But they appear to be concrete. So it's an illusion. And then that illusion is solidified and enhanced and strengthened by the Foley, being the other sound, and the music, which is why so much effort and attention is placed on the sounds. The sound. All special effects are really about the sound.
Look forward to seeing your involvement in film because it's something that excites me as a film nerd to the highest degree. Because I'm very excited.
Well, I consider myself the superintendent of my intentions, and I superintend to make movies. I want to direct film, and I want to make horror films. But I want to make really insightful horror films because entertainment, particularly entertainment, be it music, film, whatever, is like milk. Milk is nothing new, but it's only good when it's fresh. So really, in my opinion, therefore, then an artist's goal should simply be to make fresh milk. It takes a lot of the pressure off. Art's
But
supposed to entertain and draw people together, not isolate and segregate them out. And I won't be a part of it.
can't wait till you make it.
We're gonna make those movies.